Salud, amigos.
Welcome, friends, members of our dear, contaminated, and only spacecraft. We don't have another one. We must take care of it. Wherever you are, thank you for being with us. Today, you see me sitting, and this means we have guests. And when we have guests, they are very important, or they are not here. This is the emphasis on the importance of people who honor us with their presence. I want to introduce you to have more time to discuss. Juan Jose Bautista, Bolivia, plurinational state of Bolivia, has a degree and master's degree in philosophy from UNAM, Mexico, doctor in philosophy and Latin American studies of that same school. He worked with Hugo Zimmerman in the School of Mexico between 1988 and 1991. The disciple of Enrique Dussel and Frank Hilkel Almet. His books include Towards an Ethical Critical of Modern Rationality, 2013, Latin America, Towards a Dialectic of Development of Life, and Critique of Bolivian Reason, 3rd edition. It reminds us of something, that title. Critical Thought Prize 2015, Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, for his book, What Does Thinking from Latin America Mean? And our other guest, Ramon Grosfoguel, sociologist from Puerto Rico, professor of the Ethnical Study Department of Berkeley, San Francisco, one of the main exponents of the so-called decolonial movement, academic and activist for decolonization of power and knowledge. He has devoted his life to promote the breakage of modern colonial, patriarchal, racist, center-Christian thought that prevails as rationality with universal pretensions in the West. He has started multiple dialogue on decolonization throughout the world, including the Critical Thought School of Decolonization in Venezuela. He addresses high-impact thematics for a context, Islamic feminism, a very important topic for what we have been discussing, decolonization of knowledge and power, Latin American thought, ethnic and relations and race. His books include Decolonial Draw. I think that this presentation is short for both of you, but we can start by something. You have the word, and I will enjoy your knowledge as well as our viewers. Let's open fire with you. With Ramon, we had talked that he started about geopolitics because this program is characterized for being one of the most updated geopolitical programs, not only in social sciences, but philosophy as well. If you don't have geopolitics clear, you don't know where you are. And decolonial thought, more than any other thought with critical pretension, must be deeply clear of current geopolitics, not only the hegemonic one, the current one, but the pretension of decolonization of geopolitics. So Ramon here is an expert. Thank you very much for the invitation. I wanted to start by making a geopolitical map of what is happening today in the world and in Latin America. We are living times of world counter-revolution. That is, these are bell ringings, counter-revolution at planet scale. We are living such moments where the empire, with its politics towards the Middle East, If you want to go to the map. The empire tried or invaded some countries like Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. And what the empire has done in the Middle East is destruction of countries. The Syrian war is the last we have there, but it started, we know, since the 21st century, when the empire, after the Soviet Union fell, needed a new enemy. So they invented the idea that the new enemies are the Muslim. This is in the Huntington's book, Clash of Civilization, Samuel Huntington. So Huntington and Alfred Mayhem of the empire, the U.S. empire for the 21st century, because Alfred Mayhem designed the geopolitics of the empire for the 20th century with the War of Spain with the United States. They stayed with all the Spanish colonies, and the world's geopolitical design was made by Samuel Huntington with the Clash of Civilizations. And he told the Pentagon, calm down. After the Soviet Union fell, we have a new enemy. Depending on who the new enemy was, the Pentagon would have to move. Some people said China, so the Air Force won the pie of the U.S. budget. Other people said it was migrants crossing the border. In that case, it was the Navy. Others said that it was drugs coming from South America through the U.S. coasts. In that case, it was the North American Navy. So they were struggling because they needed to justify an absurd military budget that takes over more than half of the budget, the federal budget in the empire. So at that time they had to invent a new enemy. And depending who the enemy was, one of these sectors earned the biggest part of the pie. Huntington said, calm down, we have the solution. The new enemy in the world are the Muslims. September 11 came, and we can talk hours about that because it is not exhausted. This topic is open because when we look at what happened on September 11, we have more questions than answers. Everything tells us it was a self-attack and a great justification for these adventures in the Middle East. That is nothing else than about justifying that the U.S. military structure have a justified action in the post-Cold War. So here comes the invasion against Iraq, Afghanistan, the destruction of Libya, and I think the Libyan destruction is very important for Venezuela because Gaddafi, during 15 years, thought that if he opened the doors to transnational capital inside Libya and he financed Sarkozy's campaign in France and some of these imperial elites, somehow these people would be neutralized versus some attack against Libya. We saw that with all the concessions made by Gaddafi. They went after Gaddafi, destroyed the country, and killed Gaddafi. So we can't think that through concessions the empire will have a different attitude. They won't, because ultimately they go after the country's resources regardless of any concession. At a given time, they will overthrow the governments that have an anti-imperialist nature. I think we have to learn the Libyan lesson, being Venezuela, because no concession will lead any place, because what the empire wants, it to destroy the Bolivarian government, to take over the richest oil reserves of the world and mining regarding the industrial complex of the United States. So what happens? They got into these wars. They destroyed countries. In Syria, they have destroyed it. But what happens in the end, when you see, they have destroyed countries, but they haven't won any war. With all these wars, they haven't managed to control these countries after such military interventions. So they lost the war in Syria, which means that they lost an essential bastion of the U.S. strategy, that was to overthrow Syria and then go to Iran. So they didn't do that with Syria because they had Russian support, Iran, other countries, to the Syrian government, while Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. are all over the Middle East. The coup in Egypt was arranged by this triple alliance, Saudi, U.S., and Israel. Military invasions. Repeat this again, please. The Saudi, Israeli, and U.S. alliance. This is a geopolitical alliance, and they go together all over the Middle East, in Yemen, invasion to Yemen, to Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, the war against Syria, that conducted the Islamic fundamentalists trained by CIA, and when they were wounded, they went to Israeli hospitals. These people were mercenaries. There weren't even Syrians that were paid to go and make the war and overthrow the Syrian government. So I'm trying to explain this story. We don't have much time to go in detail, but I want to say that by losing the war in the Middle East, the empire goes back to Latin America. So Russia won the war in Syria. And now, in all the region, the Iran, Iraq, Syria, Russia axis has been consolidated. This alliance against the Saudi, Israeli, and U.S. axis has been very important to defeat the latter, the imperial axis. So, when they came here and lost this war, the empire goes back to Latin America, which is the historic backyard of the empire, to see how they can overthrow any kind of progressive revolutionary government. The moment they lost the war here, a possibility was open in Latin America. That was the transformation at the beginning of the 21st century. That was a breath for Latin America when the empire was entertained over here. But now that they lost that war, they went back to Latin America, and they are starting with soft coups, Paraguay, Honduras. Then we have the soft coup against Dilma in Brazil. We have transformation of Ecuador from being a government led by Correa against the empire to an empire that makes peace with Trump. We have the Bolivian government that is resisting and the Venezuelan government. But they are coming here to destroy these alternatives because the empire wants to rebuild itself in Latin America. That we must understand this geopolitical context because for many years they were entertained in the Middle East, and when they lost the war, they went back. And the great danger, because it's a great axis for Latin America, is Venezuela. On one hand, we have the rise in Brazil of a candidate that is completely fascist. We have the rise of fascism in the United States and Europe, and all over are growing with votes. Fascists in Europe, in the United States, they have Trump, a fascist leader, and now in Brazil, there's the possibility that this guy win the elections. But militarily speaking, I see the main danger is Venezuela. If Brazil falls in the hands of this guy who has publicly said he will attack Venezuela, Venezuela is fenced between a pro-imperial, military allied Colombia. On the other hand, Guyana, that is also in that imperial axis, and the missing part is Brazil. Now, it seems this man will win. I hope this is not the case, but he would place Venezuela in a very delicate situation versus the possibilities of military intervention or any other kind of intervention by the empire from the borders. Here we have Guyana, Brazil, Colombia, and we know that there are military bases around here, the Colombian region. And Colombia has more than 7 U.S. bases. And they gave them their air, land, and sea space. And now they are aligning with NATO. They're in the big leagues now. And now they're fencing Venezuela because Venezuela is geopolitically very important. On the other hand, has the largest oil wells in the world and has huge mineral resources, including very important minerals for the weapons industry. So their interest is here. So we can't be naive enough to think that the empire is looking from far away. All these processes that are happening here. NATO is not only being the big leagues, there is a commitment. Whoever attacks one member of NATO, all the others are allied to attack it. Yes, as a policy, let's say if they manufacture a scenario with Venezuela, yes, as Colombia is a victim, Colombia mobilizes the support of NATO in any conflict with Venezuela. The plans of invading Venezuela are advanced. That is nothing that is improvised. They have been planning this for a long time, and they've been making military practices, and military bases have been surrounding Venezuela on both sides, Guyana, Colombia, and now the axis that was missing was Brazil. And this man has said he is ready to attack Venezuela. And the Dutch islands we have in front also. Yes, they are NATO also and have military bases as well. So we have operations, and if you see, there's a fence around Venezuela. If you notice the movements made in the last 5 years, including under Obama, let's not believe this is only a Trump matter. It's a doctrine that has been developed, and Trump is following, but this comes from Obama years and probably even before. The thing is that they were entertained in the Middle East. With a political defeat they suffered here, they destroyed country, but they didn't win. We must also see this carefully with Venezuela, because the new modality of the empire, a time of decadence, if I can't control the place, I try a coup, I try this and other things, I can't control it, well, I destroy the place. And this is what they've done in several places in the Middle East. The quality of life of Libya I saw in Iraq well, yes, Libya was the richest country in Africa, had the most developed economy of Africa, super avid foreign currency that was huge, and state-of-the-art technology. And the people had social services, free housing, free education, money. If you want to marry, they gave money to everybody who wanted to start a family. the time Libya says we're going to change the currency from oil to another currency, that was a red line. That was, for the empire, was what Venezuela did here. The announcement of leaving the dollar, but years before Libya, in Iraq, Saddam Hussein also announced leaving the dollar, and he was immediately invaded. And the same happened with Libya. When Gaddafi announced he was going to leave the dollar, the only thing that sustains the dollar is that oil is being traded with dollars. That's the only thing that sustains dollar. It's a paper. There's no gold or anything, because they left the gold pattern. So the only thing that sustains the dollar is oil. But the moment Hussein and Gaddafi tried to do that, they were immediately invaded and their countries were destroyed. And now Venezuela has announced something similar. In this case, Venezuela has no other solution than to do it, because the economic blockade is such that you can't moving in dollars when the United States is using the dollar as a weapon of war against the Bolivarian process. So you shouldn't stay in the dollar. This tells us about a situation that is great danger for Venezuela. It has been said for several years, but the economic war and the political use of change of dollar is something that has created hyperinflation in Venezuela, where people are suffering. People saw it in the world as if it were internal matter, that the Bolivarian government had people. That's what they're selling abroad. As last year they said that killings on the streets was the government of Maduro. These are great lies that the media pass around the world, and the people believe it. People believe those stories when Maduro gave an example of how not to respond violence with violence. During Guarimbas, shooters were hired to kill the people in the streets, and Maduro gave a political response with a constituent assembly. I saw popular support in the assembly, and you notice that what they're doing has no future. So the internal aggression fell. Everything is completely disarticulated politically. The opposition, to the point that it has no capacity right now. So in Venezuela, the political process is being reinstated, where they have won several consecutive elections, but people are suffering in Venezuela, and this is sold abroad as if Maduro is keeping people hungry. There's lots of work to do to clarify that lie, because this is what circulates. What they're not telling the people is the economic war, how they hide, as they did with Chile in 71, 73. They hid merchandise and food for the to speculate with prices and people to get out to the streets. And something I always quote, which is scatological but was essential. The first thing that disappeared was toilet paper and napkins. And they're doing the same with meat. In Chile, they did the same, looking for a coup. And they're doing the same here, seeking for people to rebel against the government and somehow blame the government and hide the imperialistic hand in this sabotage against the Venezuelan economy. I think Juan José has much to say on elections in Bolivia and Brazil. Perhaps you can participate. Well, in this panorama, that Ramon tells us, which is practically the phenomenon we are looking at every day. The question is, what do we do? How we confront the White House man, and probably another one to the south soon. So I am really concerned. I mean, my U.S. visa will be taken away. We always resort to history, but not any history. We resort to the past, but not any past. Since Benjamin, after, we know that history is written always by the winners. We know that. But they write it and rewrite it so for us to have the vision they wanted to have. And a critical vision cannot start by the type of vision that the First World has imposed, essentially the United States after the Second World War. So one way of defetishizing this vision of reality or going beyond this type of diagnosis is resorting to history. Marx quotes in one of his letters around 1843-44 a man Saint-Just, which is an ideologist of the French Revolution. Saint-Just says that those who make revolution, have revolutions, do not do anything but cave their own tomb. This means that the only way of advancing in a revolutionary process is radicalizing. Radicalizing partially means go back to the roots, to be able to understand it in another way, but never go to the type of past or the vision of the past that the empire produced, but to the denied past, the concealed, forgotten, or veiled past with which we have to account for. Another detail to weave the idea is by late 60s, early 70s, Kissinger said, whatever happens to Brazil depends on what happens to Latin America. So this, what is happening to Brazil is not only happening to Brazil, but is related to what is happening in Latin America as a whole. And since we, when I say we, I mean Venezuela and Bolivia are in a process of change, we must see our processes in this view of history. In the 20th century, there were essentially revolutionary processes from the socialist point of view, the first from the Soviet Union. After the First World War, the first working proletarian revolution, and it was a phenomenon in a moment where many historians said every day we saw how the empires fell. The Austrian-Hungarian, we saw how they fell and how dynasties fell. And we all felt that something new and radical was about to happen. In the case of Lenin and the Bolsheviks, they thought the Russian Revolution and a domino effect in many countries, especially Eastern, if not Western, Europe will become socialist, and then that would be the world revolution. The years passed, and the Soviet Union remained alone. In the 50s, early 60s, a similar phenomenon happened in Latin America. In the Third World, there was a great explosion of revolutionary movements, and Cuba phenomenon occurred. And but there are many movements in the 50s. But the years passed and Cuba stayed alone. And now, the beginning of this century, it's not only the Venezuelan process, but as if we had a domino effect, Lula, Kirchner, Paraguay, Bolivia came, and it seemed that the only left for a process of change was Chile, Peru, and Colombia, and South America would be anti-imperialistic. And suddenly we are remaining alone. The question is why? I think that Brazil, as an example of what is happening in this time, a testimony, an article that was published around 3 or 4 years ago by Leonardo Boff, related to the Bolivian process in the following sense. Leonardo Boff, thanks to the Bolivian process, noticed that the only way of changing inequality at a structural level, cultural and political, in Brazil was start changing the political constitution of the state. Because the Constitution and the laws included not only robbery of the political elite, but the level of penetration that transnational could have inside the countries. It was there, protected, and so we must change that, because in the end, of all the wealth produced, it is the people that lose. I remember very well the beginnings of the 80s, exaggerating 80, if not 81. An economic report was issued in Brazil saying that Brazil has a budget only for 30% of the population and no more. And the rest, as they say in Mexico, tough luck. There was only budget for 30% of the population in Mexico. So Leonardo Boff says we must change the Constitution, and nobody listened to us. Nobody. So they left the institutional apparatus in a way that inertia continued with the pro-neoliberal economic trend. That is why Lula structurally was unable to change the economy, the culture, education, etc. All the legal framework against him. Yes. Well, Marx has a very important statement in the Capital. What is the content of capitalistic merchandise, and what is its form? What does it make it capitalistic merchandise? The content of capitalistic merchandise are social relations. And when Marx talks about this, he is talking about it negatively, because he says the content of social relations are relations of domination, exploitation, domination of social relations, human work, nature. And that is the content of merchandise. That is why merchandise reaches the market bloody. What is your form? Legal relation. This means that we never see the economic fact without the political mirror. What does this mean? To be able to develop from the beginning, capitalism had to develop its own law and juridicity. Modern law is the expansion and development of bourgeois law, or the development of bourgeois interest at legal level universally. Modern law is used to protect transnationals or local bourgeoisies against the people. That is why when the people want to do something, the first obstacle are laws, in this case constitutions, because all our constitutions are colonized constitutions made according to the First World bourgeoisie and not the people's interests. So we started looking at this phenomenon in Bolivia at the time of the Constituent Assembly. The people already had noticed that this constitution, the former constitution, served only and exclusively to protect the robbery of oligarchies and the empire. So the people mobilized, and an interesting element here is that the people's mobilization started with the peoples of the lowlands, that is, the Amazon peoples, that are next together to Brazilians. So they make a huge movement, not 1, 2 years, because this started in the mid-90s. They made a huge march for the earth, liberty, and dignity. And in 2008, 2009, they reached the Constituent Assembly, and for the first time, they declared the possibility of a plurinational state, community state. So we always say the modern state is not plurinational, and especially not community. By definition, the modern state is social, and when we say social, we are referring to this type of subjectivity that was able to objectivize bourgeoisie since its birth. It produces its own horizon of consumption. Marx says it clearly. The first problem political economy develops is not what they're going to produce, but who will consume what they produce. So they produce their consumption horizon, which is what we call society. That is why in the prologue of the first edition of The Capital, Marx says that we must subject to critique the mystery hidden in modern society. It's not only an economic test, it's also a sociological text, a critique of society. What happens with consumption? Consumption does not only realize capital, but because of consumption of what capital produces, and Marx says it very well, what consumes is not only capitalism, but is the cultural horizon contained in merchandise, that is subconsumed by consumers. And thanks to consumption, what we consume ultimately is not only capitalism but modernity. That is the geopolitical, geohistoric, and geocultural produced by the First World's bourgeoisie. Brazil's population, 90% of which has this kind of subjectivity. I was recently in Brazil, and some leaders were accusing and saying how in the 60s and 70s, during the dictatorship, to the Acre zone on the border with Peru, north of Bolivia and the south of Colombia, the army entered shooting because this zone was not settled, and killed all indigenous peoples to supply more than 8 million hectares to 10 families for 1 decade. And once this kind of land was given to them, the new owners started deforestation, burning and felling all the forests. The same when the first who arrived did in the United States. The first thing they do is kill indigenous, clean the pre-existing culture, make it all nature, to make it an object with which they can turn it into a merchandise. So with these projects, what is being imposed is not only a political economic vision, it is culturally a vision of reality. And when we start from that vision as if it were reality, we were lost. Any revolutionary process, if it doesn't fail, will become the contrary. The example of Brazil, what happened to the government of Lula? Frei Beto recently said in an article, throughout Lula's government we have insisted once and again, it's not enough to give the people to eat or dress or educate, because Lula made many universities and with a modern awareness, the horizon of decolonization didn't appear, and we always emphasize on whoever believes that the problem of decolonization is a problem of indigenous peoples has not understood anything, because the most colonized are the white people, left and right intellectuals, white people. Those that is produced by the European bourgeoisie through its university academics, denying the knowledge of our peoples. So, when through capitalistic consumption, I go back to the Brazilian example in Lula, because it's illustrative. There's a very interesting Brazilian analyst, Eric Nepomuceno, that makes chronics every once in a while with many data. I always say, as a good cartographer, he describes very well what is happening. So he says, suddenly Lula took 50 million people, poor people, out of misery. They stop being poor. But it's not any kind of poor. It's a poor family whose subjectivity is the vision imposed by consumption in this case, or what means first person, first world. So when they have money, the first thing they do is consume capitalistic production. It's not only realistic. This is well explained. When I purchase capitalistic merchandise, I'm legalizing capitalistic culture. I am telling capitalists that you produce very well, continue doing so, because you're satisfying our needs. We ourselves are financing the development of great capital, and we are allegedly anti-capitalistic and anti-imperialistic, and this is the type of consumption they seek for, and they perform a horizon of expectations in the sense that because of the type of consumption, because there are many produced by capital, when satisfaction and pleasure, and this is very well described by Marx. He says, I can purchase, or a lady can purchase a great dress that is hung in the closet. But he says that it has been realized as capital, but not as culture. And he talks about culture when the lady dresses it and feels realized. When you consume the capitalistic merchandise with a design and aesthetics belongs to the first world, in this case Europe, United States, even if we are in a revolutionary process, it has failed. And capital has won. And suddenly there's a phenomenon. This happened during the government of Dilma Rousseff. What is produced worldwide cannot be produced ad infinitum. This planet is not infinite. It has its limits.
Entonces, eso de que la tasa
So
de ganancia se puede incrementar hacia el infinito es
that
una falacia.
the earnings
Siempre hay
rate
un tope
could
y todo se empieza
multiply
en un
ad
momento de
infinitum
la
is
inversión
not true.
de regresión. Entonces, cuando empiezan a ver los problemas,
When they start looking
inmediatamente
at
entra en crisis la
problems, the
posibilidad de que
possibility
no solamente esos 50
of
millones de pobres que
those
han salido
50
de la
million
pobreza se
people
mantengan,
leaving
digamos,
poverty remain
en la clase media o un poquito abajo,
out of
sino que
it,
puedan perder ese privilegio,
but
pero a su vez
also
aparece el fenómeno de que
the
la clase media,
phenomenon
en
that
tanto
the
clase
middle
media, pueda
class
perder sus
could
privilegios.
lose
¿Por
its
qué?
privileges
Porque
also appears because
la capacidad de la producción de riqueza
the
no es hacia
wealth
el infinito.
production capacity is not ad
Entonces,
infinitum.
como hemos llegado a la
So,
visión de que
since
el
we've
tipo de
arrived to the
consumo
vision
que
that the
nos hace
type
como
of
humanos, el
consumption
tipo de
that
consumo
makes us as
burgués
humans
moderno de primer
consume
mundo,
a bourgeois
cuando eso
modern
entra en
consumption,
peligro, entonces
when
afloran
this
los
is in
sentimientos
danger,
más malsanos, ocultos,
the most
etcétera, etcétera.
concealed,
Entonces, de haber estado en una situación
bad
de devolución, empieza a aparecer el
reminders have.
fenómeno de la
So, after a
involución de ese tipo de
revolution,
procesos.
this type of
¿Por qué?
process occurs,
Porque todavía no
inversion,
hemos tomado conciencia de
because
cuán
we still
colonizados
has
estamos, no
not
solamente culturalmente
become
hablando, sino
aware
aquí
of
en este
how
caso
colonized
políticamente
we
hablando, en
are.
el caso de
In the,
las
in the
revoluciones.
case of revolutions,
Entonces,
how
frente a esto, ¿qué hacemos? Hay
colonized
que
we are
volver al
politically.
principio.
So we have to
¿De
go
dónde
back to the
todo esto a partir? ¿Y cuándo ha
beginning
partido todo esto? Hace más de 500
more
años.
than 500 years ago.
Entonces, una descolonización de la
So,
visión que desde el IRAC ha
decolonization of the
impuesto con
vision,
relativo éxito primer mundo y en este caso Estados Unidos, usted sabe, hace poquito Estados Unidos se da el lujo
recently the
de
United
amenazar a
States
Centroamérica,
threatened
cuidado con
Central
estar haciendo
America.
negocios con China.
Beware of
No,
doing
o
business
sea,
with China.
descaradamente y abiertamente,
This
ni
is
siquiera
cynically and
diplomáticamente.
openly,
Antes
not
era
even
más,
Dándole órdenes
diplomatically,
al patio trasero.
sí, pues, o sea,
giving
antes
orders to its
antes mantenían
backyard.
formas. Ahora han perdido
Before
completamente
they
las formas.
kept their
Y han
forms,
perdido
now they've
completamente
lost
las
them
formas, quiere decir
completely.
que,
And this means that
el tipo de poder que
the
tenían
type
está
of power
empezando
they
a
have is starting
socavarse poco a
to
poco.
undermine
Entonces,
gradually.
tienen que recurrir a
So they
aquello
have to
que
resort
aparentemente
to what
ocultaban bien,
apparently they
¿no?
did
Porque
good,
está empezando a aflorar
because
este fenómeno
this
y un proceso de,
phenomena
¿cómo se llama?,
of
de la descolonización.
decolonization starting
Queda
to
poquito
rise.
tiempo, voy a,
Since we don't have
¿cómo
much
se llama?,
time,
acelerar
I'm
el
going
argumento.
to accelerate my argument.
Marx muestra muy bien,
Marx
especialmente
shows very
al
well,
principio de sus
especially
obras,
at
dice,
the
bueno,
beginning
frente
of
a esto, ¿qué
its
hacemos?
works.
¿No?
What do we do?
Él dice, solamente
He said,
puede ser revolucionario aquel sector
revolutionary can only be
que
that sector of the
encarna
population
casi
that
de modo universal
almost
todo lo que de
universally
humanidad
has everything of
como
what
negación se le ha negado
humanity has
a un
been
ser humano,
denied to a human being.
¿no? Entonces, cuando partimos de ese,
So,
entonces podemos hablar
when we start
de un
from that,
proceso gracias al cual
we
se puede
can
impulsar
talk about a
un fenómeno
process upon which
revolucionario
we
de
can
raíz, no
promote
radical. Por
a
eso dicen,
revolutionary
todos,
process
digo,
from the roots.
la raíz, en última instancia, es el ser humano. Y cualquier tipo de tratamiento a nivel radical
Roots
tiene
are
que empezar por el
ultimately
ser humano,
from
porque
humans,
la raíz
and
del ser
all
humano
processes
es el
must
ser
start
humano, ahí dice, ¿no? Pero
from
pues
humans.
no es el ser humano de la Revolución
It's
Francesa,
not
en este caso
humans
es
of the
abstracto, porque
French
es el
Revolution,
proceso.
abstract. This is specific.
Entonces, se pone a analizar
So
por
he
qué
started
es que durante la
analyzing
Revolución
why
Francesa
during the
la
French
burguesía se
Revolution
presenta a sí
the
mismo
bourgeoisie
como fuese
presents
el sujeto
itself
universal.
as if it were the
Y Marx
universal
va
subject.
mostrando de que
And
no
Marx
es así.
shows that
¿Por
it's
qué?
not so,
Porque como es clase
because
media,
since it's
está
middle
entre la
class,
monarquía
it's
y
between the
el pueblo
monarchy
y
and the
el
people,
proletariado,
or
dice,
proletarian.
la defensa de
And
sus
he says the
intereses y la
defense of
realización
its
de sus
interests
intereses
and the realization of
pretende,
its
por un lado,
interests, on
quitarle a
one
estos de
hand,
arriba
pretends to
lo
take
que tenían,
away
pero a
what
su
the
vez mantener
people
ello
above them
implica
had. But it also
explotarles a estos de abajo
implies to
lo que
exploit
pudiesen
to
tener
those
y
below him
de tal modo que
them,
la
and
burguesía
so the
se pudiese
bourgeoisie
mantener, digamos,
can
como
remain
clase, en este
as
caso, media. Entonces dice, ¿no?
a middle class.
Entonces desciende
He says
al
no,
plano
so
del
he goes
proletariado.
down to
Entonces, no tiene
proletarian.
nada.
And he says
Ni
they don't
propiedad
have
privada
anything.
tienen,
They don't even
solamente,
have
digamos,
private
acceso
property.
a su
They
mano
only
de obra.
have access to labor.
Entonces, dice solamente la clase obrera.
So
puede
he
ser,
says that
digamos, la
only the working
revolucionaria.
class
Contener
can be
en todas sus
revolutionary
aspiraciones lo que todo
and
ser humano,
contain in
digamos,
all
en instancia
aspirations what every
pretende.
human being
Pero ahora
pretense.
sabemos que después del modelo
But now we
neoliberal,
know that after the
en parte el
neoliberal
modelo
model,
neoliberal ha servido para hacer desaparecer a la
partially
clase obrera.
the neoliberal model
En
has
Bolivia
been
usted sabe,
used
con el
to
decreto
disappear the
2160,
working
por
class.
decreto
In
desaparecen las
Bolivia,
minas.
Decree
Desapareciendo las minas,
21060, they
desaparecen los
disappeared
mineros.
the mines,
O
and
sea, ya
miners
no hay más clase
disappeared.
obrera,
No
proletaria,
more
etcétera,
proletarian
etcétera.
working
Entonces,
class.
¿dónde está el fenómeno
So
de la
where
revolución?
is the
Y por eso
revolution?
mucha gente pensaba
And
que
this
después
is
de la
why
década
many
del
people
90 el
thought that
socialismo
after the
era
90s,
imposible.
socialism
Bueno,
was impossible.
entonces, una vez que desaparece
So
la clase
once
obrera,
the
¿qué
working
hacemos?
class disappears, what do we
El mismo Marx
do?
muestra.
Marx proves and says
El proletariado, antes de ser
proletarian, before
proletariado,
being
era
proletarian,
pobre.
was poor.
¿Por qué era pobre?
It
Se
was
vende a sí mismo
poor
como mano
and
de obra.
then sold
Era
itself as
pobre
labor.
como pueblo.
It was poor as a people.
Entonces, él venía del
It
pueblo,
came from the
era pueblo,
people,
se convierte
it
en obrero.
became
Y
a
dice, y
worker.
después de ser
And he said,
obrero, porque
after
a lo
being a
mejor se
worker,
jubila, ¿qué
because
es?
when he
¿Sigue siendo
retires,
clase social? No, vuelve a
he
ser
continues
pueblo.
being a social class? No, he
Entonces, el
continues being
antes y el
people.
después de
So
la
the
clase
before
social
and after the social
llamada,
class
¿cómo se
called
llama? Proletariado,
proletarian is the people.
y este pueblo,
And this
en
people,
tanto que pueblo,
as
tiene
such,
conciencia social,
has
tiene
no
conciencia
social awareness.
comunitaria,
It has a
porque son pobres que
community
vienen de las áreas
awareness because they
vienen
come
del
from
campo.
the
Y
rural
Marx muestra
areas.
muy bien en los
And
Lunes
Marx
este
shows
proceso
this very
de cómo
well
es que
of
cuando
how
la modernidad y el
when
capitalismo,
modernity
para
and
poder
capitalism, in order to
desarrollarse,
develop,
negar
need to
sistemáticamente todo
systematically
horizonte rural,
deny all rural
con el
horizons,
campo y el campesino, desprestigiarlo,
peasants,
empobrecerlo,
impoverish
condenarlo,
them,
humillarlo,
condemn
de tal
them,
modo de que
humiliate
aparezca
them.
alguien
So
allí ofreciéndose, dice más, como si fuese una
someone
prostituta para que durante
comes
8
to
horas
offer
el
himself as a
empleador pueda hacer de
prostitute,
su corporalidad
so
lo
they
que
can
le
use
conviene.
them for whatever they want for during
Entonces,
8
él muestra
hours.
muy bien.
He
Antes de
shows
la
very
categoría
well
clase está la
before the
categoría pueblo,
class
y después de la
category is the
categoría clase
people
sigue estando la
category,
categoría
and
pueblo,
after the
de lo cual
class
no se dio cuenta
is
el marxismo
there's
del
the
siglo XX.
people.
Y cuando desaparece
And
la clase
Marxism in the
obrera,
20th century didn't notice
con
this.
el
When the
modelo
working
neoliberal,
class
aparece el
disappeared with the
pueblo.
neoliberal model, the people
Entonces,
appeared.
decimos, hay dos tipos
So
de
we
pueblo,
say
y
there
también
are
lo
two
dice
kinds
Marx.
of people, and
Uno
Marx
es el
says it
pueblo con
well.
conciencia social,
One, the people with social
sea, moderno,
awareness, modern,
y otro es el pueblo
and
con
the other
conciencia
one with
comunitaria.
community
O sea, el pueblo que
awareness.
se piensa
The
a sí
people
mismo,
that
se ve a sí mismo,
thinks
se
and
entiende a
sees
sí mismo
itself, understands
desde
itself
la cosmovisión,
from
desde la cultura
the
y la historia
cosmovision,
milenaria
culture,
que
and
tenían nuestros
millenary
pueblos
history
antes de
our
que
peoples
llegaran
had
acá los
before
españoles
the
y los europeos y
Spaniards and
después de eso
Europeans
los
arrived here.
norteamericanos, y que no se ha quedado hace 500 años, sino que sigue
That did not
prosperando, y
remain
tiene una
500 years
tradición
ago, but
completamente
continue
distinta de lo que sea,
because they have a
no
completely
solamente
different
la realidad,
vision
sino
of
también
not
la
only of
geopolítica,
reality,
la
but
cultura y la
geopolitics, culture,
¿Qué
and
opciones le
history.
quedan?
Entonces,
What
haciendo
options are there?
el giro.
So, closing the circle.
Aquellos que hacen revoluciones a medias,
Those
lo
who
único que
make
hacen es cavar su propia
partial
tumba.
revolutions, the only thing they do
Una revolución
is
a
cave
medias.
their own tombs.
Se la
A
produce,
partial
se la está
revolution
produciendo
is being
cuando se deja
produced
intacto
when
el fundamento
they
histórico
leave the
cultural gracias
historic
al cual
cultural
el capitalismo
basis
sigue intacto, vivito y
for which
coleando en la
capitalism is
modernidad.
intact, and that is
Que es la visión que
modernity.
de realidad
It
se
is
ha
the
desarrollado
vision
para
that has
negar
been developed to
exactamente eso.
deny exactly our
Entonces,
peoples.
Cuando nuestros pueblos,
So, when
y
our
esto se ha visto bien en
peoples,
Bolivia,
and this has
cuando
been
nuestros
seen in
pueblos salen a
Bolivia, when our
defender
peoples go
al
out to
agua y al gas,
defend water
ya
and
no como
gas,
recurso natural,
not
sino como Pachamama.
as natural resources, but as
Pachamama
our
es lo visceral,
sacred
lo
earth,
histórico, lo
Pachamama.
mineral incluso,
It is the
lo
cultural,
profundo.
the deep.
Lo profundo. Ahora sabemos,
Now we
Equivaldría a
know
Madre Tierra, Pachamama.
Pachamama is Mother Earth.
a la única cultura y civilización
The
que se
only
le ha
culture
ocurrido
and civilization that
la
has
barbaridad de
thought
concebir
the
a la Pachamama como
barbarian
objeto, o sea,
to
como naturaleza,
consider our Mother Earth as an object,
tuvo que hacer
nature.
esto para convertirla en objeto.
They had to
sea,
do to
mercancía.
make it a
Y después de eso,
merchandise, and after
a los
that,
pueblos originarios, a los campesinos,
the
y a
originary
los pueblos
peoples,
afros.
the peasant peoples, and
constituyeron.
the Afro
No
peoples, they
somos
made them.
mercancía, pero nos
We are not
constituyeron.
merchandise, but they made
la
us
Pachamama,
merchandise.
¿no?
The
Lo
Mother
que usted dice,
Earth,
nuestra
what you
única
said,
nave espacial
our only
es
spacecraft
Pachamama.
is
La
Mother Earth.
constituyeron en
They
objeto.
made it an
de
object
explotación
of
y mercancía.
exploitation and
Marx
merchandise.
mismo dice,
Marx says whatever subjective human defines according to the type of relation that humans establish with nature. When they treat it as an object, humans become inhumane. When humans relate with nature in terms of mother, they humanize. It seems that the negatively called primitive peoples are more developed with Mother Earth. How are we going in that virtuous cycle? And this is the suitability of decolonization. We need to show that the vision of reality that modernity has imposed with relative success is a lie. How can we save ourselves from the lie? Modernity is a cosmovision. In Marx's language, it's a mirror.
No, lo anterior.
Repeat it,
Para volver a
please.
lo de Marx, la comparación.
Modernity is like a mirror, thanks to which we see each other in some way. Human beings are not looking at ourselves. We see ourselves through people or through mirrors. There's a great utopia, a great myth. It's like a mirror, thanks to which some acts have sense. So it is time to throw away the great meta tale where we appear as underdeveloped, etc., etc. And this type of reality is destroying all reality, not only of the third world, but all possibility of life on Earth. So when we make this kind of regression, something like has happened in Bolivia, the peoples that do not lose their memory acquire a force that no one can stop. This is why they want to stop our processes. I have lived this dramatically and pleasantly in our plurinational state of Bolivia, a nation I admire, but has a special peculiarity that is consistent with nature. We have 1 minute to say goodbye. I would like to say, to conclude, consistent with the line that Juan Jose has talked about, that here in Venezuela we have the proposal of Hugo Chavez's thought that a very important decolonization moves on how to go beyond the modern exploiting model. If we lose that horizon proposed by Chavez, the revolutionary process is lost because we would be swallowed by capitalistic modernity. One anecdote. 2 or 3 years before, I was invited to a seminar in Uruguay and exposed all these ideas, and people were very committed, but asked what we do. We don't have originary peoples. And I made a question. Well, let's assume that there are no originary peoples. Why are Uruguayans called charruas? We feel proud of the national spirit of the charrua indigenous. I come from there. The charrua spirit has not died. It continues alive. The spirit of our peoples continue on the condition we believe on them. This has been, for those of us who have known the Sahara and suddenly give us water. I'm going to drink it slowly, or I will drown, but I am enriched and very proud to have you in the program. And I hope every time you come here, you pass through this program.
¿Cómo quedó eso? ¿Cómo? Ese es mi editorial de cierre.
That's my closing statement in your honor.
Señor director.